In June 1912, 8 people went to sleep in a small house in Iowa. 6 of them were children. By morning, all 8 were dead, killed with an axe while they slept, so quietly that not one person in the house next door heard a single sound. The killer covered the murder weapon in blood, left it behind, and vanished without a trace. 2 trials, dozens of suspects, over 100 years of investigation, nobody has ever been convicted. This is the story of the Villisca Axe Murders, one of the most disturbing unsolved crimes in American history. On the evening of June 9, 1912, the town of Villisca, Iowa, looked exactly like what it was, a quiet farming community of about 2,500 people, the kind of place where nothing much happened and everyone knew everyone else. That evening, the Moore family attended a Children's Day program at the local Presbyterian church, an event Sarah Moore herself had helped organize. Josiah Moore, 43, was a respected local businessman who ran a farm implement store. His wife, Sarah, 39, was well liked in the community. They had 4 children: Herman, 11, Mary Catherine, 10, Arthur, 7, and Paul, the youngest, just 5 years old. After the church program ended, 2 more children came home with the Moore family for a sleepover: sisters Lena and Ina Stillinger, 12 and 8 years old. It was meant to be an ordinary night, the kind of night where children fall asleep giggling in a spare room, parents check the locks, and a small town settles into silence. By morning, all 8 of them were dead. A neighbor, Mary Peckham, grew concerned when the Moore family hadn't emerged from their house by 9 the next morning, unusually late for a family that always rose early and had chores to tend to. She knocked. No answer. She tried the door and found it locked from the outside, the way Josiah always left it. She called Josiah's brother, Ross Moore, who came with his own key. Ross let himself in. The house was dark, curtains still drawn, and something about the silence felt wrong before he'd even reached a bedroom. He walked through the parlor and opened the door to the downstairs guest room first and found the bodies of the 2 Stillinger sisters. He backed out immediately, telling Mary Peckham to call the town marshal, Hank Horton, and didn't go any further into the house himself. When Horton arrived and searched the property, he found the rest of the family upstairs, Josiah and Sarah in their bed, and all 4 Moore children in their room down the hall. Every one of them had been struck while they slept, in the same manner, with the same weapon. What Ross Moore and Marshal Horton discovered inside would become one of the most disturbing crime scenes in American history. Word spread through the small town within minutes, and by mid-morning, a crowd of neighbors, reporters, and curious onlookers had gathered outside the house, some of whom made their way inside before any real effort was made to secure the scene. In 1912, there was no established protocol for crime scene preservation. People walked through the rooms, touched surfaces, and by some accounts even handled evidence before investigators could properly document anything. Historians who've studied the case agree this contamination made the eventual investigation far harder than it needed to be, and may have destroyed evidence that could have identified the killer. Investigators determined the killings had taken place sometime between midnight and 5 in the morning. The attacker had entered the home and gone first to the upstairs bedroom where Josiah and Sarah were sleeping, striking them repeatedly with an axe. Josiah's injuries were so severe that his face was barely recognizable. From there, the killer moved through the house methodically, into the children's room, and finally downstairs to the guest room where the Stillinger sisters were sleeping. All 8 victims had been struck with the same weapon, the Moore family's own axe, found at the scene, left behind by whoever had used it. 2 days later, the county coroner opened a formal inquest, interviewing 13 people who may have had knowledge relevant to the case. It produced no immediate breakthrough. What it did produce was a written record of just how little anyone in Villisca seemed to know. No one had seen a stranger, no one had heard a disturbance, and no one could offer investigators anything beyond speculation. What made the case even more unsettling to investigators wasn't just the brutality, it was the silence. The Moore house sat close enough to neighboring homes that any prolonged struggle, any scream should have woken someone nearby. No one heard anything. Whatever happened in that house happened fast, and it happened without a single victim managing to escape, fight back successfully, or raise an alarm. The case exploded into a national sensation almost immediately. Newspapers across the country ran the story. Private detectives were hired. The Iowa Bureau of Criminal Investigation and even the Burns Detective Agency became involved. And yet, more than a century of investigation has never produced a confirmed killer. Suspicion first fell on a man named William Blackie Mansfield, who had already been convicted of an axe murder involving members of his own family years earlier, and who had been released from prison shortly before the Villisca killings. A private investigation funded by the Moore and Stillinger families later produced evidence suggesting Mansfield had actually been in Villisca the night of the murders. Witnesses claimed to have seen him in town, and a hotel register appeared to place him there as well, though the reliability of that evidence has been disputed by researchers ever since. Ultimately, Mansfield was cleared through payroll records showing he'd been working several hundred miles away in Illinois at the time, and the case against him was dropped for lack of evidence. Then came Iowa State Senator Frank F. Jones, a powerful and well-connected businessman in the region. The theory against Jones centered on personal animosity. Josiah Moore had once worked for Jones before leaving to open a competing farm implement business, and rumors circulated for years that Jones held a grudge serious enough to want Moore dead, potentially through a hired intermediary. A private detective named James Wilkerson pursued this theory aggressively for years, publicly naming Jones and pushing the hired killer angle through the press. It never produced formal charges, but the accusations followed Jones for the rest of his life, and by most accounts, permanently damaged both his political career and his reputation in the community he'd once dominated. No direct evidence was ever found tying him to the scene. The suspect who came closest to a conviction was a traveling minister named Reverend George Kelly. Kelly was known to locals as an unsettling figure, erratic behavior, an odd fixation on the case, and letters he'd written that investigators considered incriminating. He was arrested years after the murders and tried twice. The first trial ended in a hung jury. The second ended in acquittal. To this day, no physical evidence has ever definitively linked Kelly or anyone else to the crime scene. Investigators also found the scene had been deliberately staged after the killings. Every mirror in the house had been covered with clothing or cloth, and a 4-pound slab of raw bacon, taken from the icebox, had been left on the floor beside the murder weapon. To this day, no one has offered a proven explanation for either detail. Over the decades, true crime researchers, journalists, and amateur investigators have proposed dozens of alternate theories, including a widely discussed theory popularized in the book The Man from the Train by Bill and Rachel James, that ties Villisca to a series of similar axe murders across the Midwest in the same era, and names a specific traveling suspect, Paul Muller. Like every other name connected to this case, Muller was never charged, and the theory remains disputed among researchers. None of the alternate theories have ever been proven. The Villisca case remains, by every official measure, exactly what it was in June 1912, unsolved. The house itself still stands. In 1997, it was added to the National Register of Historic Places, preserved almost exactly as it looked the morning the bodies were found. Today, people can tour the property, and some choose to stay overnight, drawn by more than a century of reported unexplained sounds and sensations inside the home, though none of that has ever been verified and isn't part of the documented case record. What continues to draw investigators and researchers back to Villisca, generation after generation, isn't just the brutality of the crime, it's the completeness of the mystery. No confirmed motive, no confession that ever held up, no forensic evidence by the standards of 1912 investigation strong enough to convict a single person beyond reasonable doubt, even after 2 trials against the same man. Every suspect the case ever produced, Mansfield, Jones, Kelly, Muller, was eventually let go for the same reason. Not enough proof, one way or the other, to say with certainty who did it. That's what makes Villisca different from most cold cases. It isn't a case with one obvious suspect who simply couldn't be convicted. It's a case where, more than a century later, investigators still can't agree on which of several plausible answers is the right one. Was it a jealous business rival with the money to hire it done? A drifter with a documented history of axe violence moving from town to town? A disturbed traveling minister whose confession collapsed under scrutiny? Or someone whose name was never even written down in a single surviving record? 8 people went to sleep in an ordinary house on an ordinary night in an ordinary town. Someone walked in, killed all of them within the same few hours, left the murder weapon behind, and disappeared so completely that no one has ever been held accountable. More than 110 years later, the case remains open. The house remains standing. And whoever committed the Villisca Axe murders was never identified and never caught.